Good day, you're watching the Ruslan Belov channel. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you to subscribe, as it greatly helps the promotion of the channel. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. The fighting continues, and we keep analyzing the frontline situation. Let's switch to the map. So friends, over the past 24 hours, two main events took place on the front. First, the fighters of the Russian Vostok Group made a powerful push of 6.5 kilometers, and in just one sector they took control of over 20 square kilometers. Second, Russian assault troops officially entered Pokrovsk. As of the evening, urban combat was taking place in the city. But let's go in order. I want to start this update with the situation in the south. Yesterday, a soldier from the Zaporizhzhia Axis sent me a video of their regiment in action. The 108th Regiment, operating in Kamenskoye. Right now, they're trying to advance from the northern part of the village towards Stepnohursk. He sent me footage of their attack on Ukrainian forces in that area. Let me tell you this, the fighting there is intense, and both sides are taking losses. At the same time, the Ukrainian Armed Forces, AFU, are trying to conduct daily counterattacks here, or rather, attempting to, but without success. The heights in this area are under Russian control, and that gives a major advantage. However, what the AFU has managed so far is to slow down the Russian advance. So despite our progress, the breakthrough to the right bank, the capture of the northern part of Kamenskoye, and the advance toward Plavny, the expected cascading collapse of Ukrainian defense hasn't happened. They've withdrawn to new defensive lines, and now it's quite difficult for us to break through. Still, I believe that Russian forces will reach Stepnohursk by the end of the summer, and that's a major improvement in position. From Stepnohursk to Zaporizhzhia, it's less than 20 kilometers. As for other sections in Zaporizhzhia region, the Orikhiv front remains unchanged. Fighting continues in Malotokmachka and on the approaches to Novoandreevka. But so far, no significant progress. However, according to local reports, changes are coming soon. They're preparing for something, so things will heat up there. There's no change around Huliaipol either, but considering our recent success in Malinivka, developments are expected soon. Even now, although it's not marked on the map unless you switch on the grey zone layer, Russian forces have started moving towards Zelenyi High. This means the AFU has no control over this area. There have also been reports of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups, DRG, actively entering the neighboring village of Poltavka. As I said in a previous video, this village must be taken to secure the rear and establish control over the flanks. Now let's move to the main events of the past 24 hours. The 6.5-kilometer breakthrough and the entry into Pokrovsk. Look at what's happening in the Vostok Group's area of responsibility. It's impressive. Surprisingly, if you watched my update yesterday, you'll remember that the AFU managed to organize counterattacks in two areas. The first was near the village of Yalta, where they entered the northwestern outskirts and raised their blue and yellow flag. The second was near Voskresenka. If you don't remember, just re-watch yesterday's video. There, they pushed us back 3 kilometers to this point. They recaptured an area of 6.5 square kilometers, but lost it almost immediately. Less than 12 to 13 hours later, Vostok fighters launched their own counterattack, regained all lost positions, and advanced an additional 3 kilometers. They entered Voskresenka, pushed 700 meters into the village, and took full control of its eastern part. So the AFU was celebrating its counterattack success just yesterday, but today they've lost everything. And even more. If they regained 6.5 square kilometers the day before yesterday, they lost 21.8 square kilometers in just 24 hours, almost 22. You don't joke around with Vostok. As I said yesterday, the Russian steamroller is unstoppable for the AFU. No matter what counterattacks they launch, they can't even hold recaptured ground for a day. They keep collapsing. Losing over 20 square kilometers in a single sector, that's a collapse. They tried to contain the advance toward Voskresenka with counterattacks, but it didn't work. Fighting is already underway inside Voskresenka. And what does that mean? It means that battles have begun for the last stronghold in the south. Once it falls, it'll only be a matter of days before vast areas of fields, about 60 square kilometers, start falling piece by piece. So the crisis the AFU faces in southern Donetsk region hasn't gone away. There's been no improvement. On the Novopavlivka axis, the situation remains stable, no significant gains for either side. But yesterday, a major setback for the AFU happened in Pokrovsk. Nothing is marked on the map here, but here's a screenshot for you. Ukrainian military channels were in panic yesterday. Why? Because our assault group managed to infiltrate Pokrovsk from the south, specifically through Zverevo, Leontyevichi, and into the city. Our recon groups had entered Pokrovsk before, but usually in twos or threes. This time, a much larger group broke through, and that's why there was panic. As of last night, urban combat was underway in Pokrovsk. I don't know the current morning status. Obviously, a group of 10 stormtroopers can't achieve any strategic goals. This was more of a probe for weak points in Pokrovsk's defenses. But it sends a strong signal to the AFU. Larger Russian groups can now enter the city. And what happens when we cut off the main supply artery from the north? That moment is approaching fast. While there hasn't been much news recently from the eastern flank, the fighting continues. Even Ukrainian sources confirmed yesterday that battles are ongoing near the Rodinskaya mine. That mine is the strongest defensive point in the area. If it falls, it will be a death sentence for Rodinske. Considering the Russian advance further north, where fighting is already underway near Fedorivka, it's likely that a verdict has already been passed not only on Rodinske, but also on Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad. The AFU will not be able to hold these cities. That's a fact. They will fall. The only question is whether that happens within the next 2 to 3 months or closer to December to January. But they will lose these 3 cities, that's inevitable. On the Kostiantynivka axis, fierce fighting continues in Yablunivka. Even though half of the village is under our control, the intensity of combat is increasing. The AFU does not want to surrender this defensive hub to Russian forces, understandably so, as it would open the way to Kostiantynivka from the south. Heavy fighting also continues in Sherbinivka. After Petrovka fell, Sherbinivka is the last suburb of Toretsk, still under AFU control. Even though the frontline configuration there is disadvantageous for the AFU, they're in no rush to retreat. In Kondrativka, Russian troops have been in a semi-encircled position for several weeks now, but they continue to hold their ground. It's tough, supplies only come by air, but they're still holding on. That's truly remarkable. Both I and other analysts believed that after the AFU breakthrough to the north, with Russian troops surrounded on 3 sides, we would lose Kondrativka. But days and weeks have passed, and the guys still control half or even slightly more than half of the village. That's true strength of spirit. Well, that's all for today regarding the situation on the front lines. Now a few words about the political developments. Russia has almost neutralized Ukraine's fleet of M1 Abrams tanks. The National Interest reports, Ukraine has lost 87% of the tanks it received. Out of 31 tanks transferred, only 4 remain operational. Trump has demanded that Germany provide Patriot air defense systems to Kyiv from its own stockpiles. According to Bild, Trump is not planning to share the U.S. Army's systems. Originally, the plan was for the U.S. to supply Ukraine with air defense systems from its own reserves, and Germany would finance them. But now Europe is expected to supply systems directly from its own arsenals, meaning it's no longer enough to just pay for weapons. Europe must now deplete its own stockpiles and place orders for replacements with the American defense industry. Closed-door negotiations have been ongoing for several days to determine who can assist Ukraine. At the moment, Switzerland is being pushed back in the queue for Patriot systems. The first unit will not go to Bern, but to Ukraine, paid for by Germany. However, the system is still being finalized by an American company and won't be ready for another 6 to 8 months. Trump also claimed that thanks to his actions, the influence of BRICS has supposedly diminished significantly. There's a little group called BRICS. It's disappearing fast. They wanted to try to take down the dollar, to end the dollar's dominance, the dollar standard. I told every country in the BRICS consortium will impose a 10% tariff on you. The next day, they had a summit and hardly anyone showed up. They said, leave us alone. They didn't want to be hit with tariffs. It's amazing, Trump stated. He was apparently referring to the BRICS summit, which was indeed attended without the heads of Russia and China. However, it's worth noting that their absence had already been confirmed well before Trump's statement. Hungary will not accept the EU budget designed to finance Ukraine, said Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. I will never accept any EU budget that sends Hungarian money to Ukraine. I will never accept a budget that destroys Hungarian farmers. I will never accept any EU budget that leaves Hungary defenseless. I will never accept a situation where Hungarians receive the resources they deserve only if they submit to Brussels' war and migration gender policy. It would be good if Brussels finally learned. Hungary's answer is never. If we look only at the financial side, we can see that in addition to the 20 to 25% of the budget allocated to Ukraine, another 10 to 12% is used to pay off previous EU loans. Orbán has even suggested the possibility of Hungary leaving the European Union. Budapest believes the EU has transformed from an economic alliance into a political one, a shift that, in Hungary's view, may justify its exit from the Union. However, for now, staying in the EU remains more beneficial for Budapest. The Hungarian Prime Minister also said that to resolve the conflict in Ukraine, a meeting between the presidents of Russia and the United States is necessary. Orbán emphasized that without personal talks between Putin and Trump, a settlement is impossible. It doesn't happen that everyone wants peace, and yet there is no peace. What happens is that everyone talks about peace, but some do not want it. And that's why the war continues. Europe is returning to the logic of force. On July 17, 2025, in London, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz signed the largest Anglo-German agreement since World War II. The so-called Kensington Treaty is a bilateral agreement on military cooperation that includes mutual security guarantees. An attack on one is seen as an attack on both. Joint development of long-range missile systems and other military equipment. Measures against illegal migration and cross-border crime. Strengthening Europe's defense autonomy without direct involvement of the EU or NATO. This event evokes historical parallels with 1933, highlighting some unsettling structural similarities. 1. A shift in leadership and political direction. In 1933, Hitler came to power in Germany, marking a radical change in course. Today, in the UK, power has shifted to the left under Starmer, while in Germany, conservative Friedrich Merz leads the government. Both present themselves as Europe's new leadership and are trying to form a London-Berlin axis amid a weakening EU and internal NATO crises. 2. Response to perceived threats and militarization. In the 1930s, Germany justified rearmament with feelings of humiliation and encirclement. Today, the new Anglo-German axis speaks openly about a looming war and the need for leadership in Europe's defense. Joint arms production is beginning. Negotiations for new arms exports are underway, and military legislation is being simplified. Authorities in both countries are promoting the need for decisiveness and leadership, reinforcing the idea that military power is a universal tool of foreign policy. The parallels with 1933 are not in the figures themselves, but in the decision-making mechanisms, and those mechanisms look eerily familiar. The treaty signed on July 17th is not just a diplomatic act, it's a declaration of a new division of spheres of influence in Europe focused on rearmament and readiness for open confrontation.